Soul, a podcast dedicated to the rich culinary history and foodways of African Americans and peoples from the African diaspora. I'm your host, Charla L. Draper, food consultant, former food editor of Ebony magazine, and founder of National Soul Food Month. Today we're talking with nationally known celebrity chef Carla Hall. Carla was first introduced to us on Top Chef in 2008. Carla is an author, television personality, and philanthropist, as well as host of Chasing Flavor. Carla is going to chat with us today about soul food and why it's important to keep it on the table. Hi, Carla. Welcome.
Hello, Charlotte. I think everybody's going to have a hard time, Carla and Charlotte. Yes, our names are so similar. Thank you for having me, and thanks to everyone for joining us. I am so excited to be here.
I've been doing my research, and I'm going to start with what advice would you give to that little girl to help her achieve her dreams?
I think the first thing I would tell that little girl is to embrace and appreciate and record the stories of my grandmother, my grandfather, all of my relatives, my great grandmother. There are so many stories that were told around in the kitchen and for holidays, and I wish I had those because I wasn't cooking back then. So I was eating. But I think one is to preserve that and just to remember it and just to have their voices and their stories sort of captured. Because even though I went through my period where I was pushing soul food away, once I was pulling it back toward me, I had sort of missed all of those moments. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I think that certainly when we grew up eating, even some of those memorable flavors carry us back to the people we were enjoying that snack or that meal with. And it's really a way of passing on family memories and passing on love. The next question, when you were a little bit older, you burst onto the scene as a contestant in season 5 of Top Chef. The audience loved you and remembered you. And I'm sure that experience was both challenging and rewarding. Now, what are 2 or 3 things you learned during your first Top Chef experience that influence you today?
Well, I love how you framed this question. You said you were a little bit older for the first question. So I was 44 when I did Top Chef the first time. Season 8, I was season 5 actually. I was 44, and I started a catering business when I was. Let's see. I went to culinary school at 30. So by the time I did Top Chef, I want to give everybody sort of context. So I went to culinary school at 30. From 25 to 30, I was hustling and I started a lunch delivery service where I worked every single day from when I was 25 to when I was 30. And I was just trying to figure it out. And I think the passion of figuring it out and also trying to find myself, and I landed in this search in food. So by the time I got to Top Chef, it was completely unexpected. Here you have this Black woman who's 44, who was a caterer. So I had a couple of things working against me. One, there were a lot of younger kids. I'm saying younger, like 25, younger than 25, working in restaurants. So you sort of are an underdog if you're catering. So one thing that I learned was I learned about soul food. That's when I actually started to accept soul food. I'm so stressed during that challenging time that I started making foods that actually made me feel better, or foods that what the things that sort of popped into my head, and it was soul food, but I didn't even appreciate it in the moment. It wasn't until after I got off. Oh yeah, you're the one who does desserts and you do soul food and you cook with love. So that was that. The other thing was to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. I still use it to this very day. I think that when you're on a show and you have these challenges thrown to you, you have to dig deeper. It come from a place that you didn't know that you had the ability to draw from. And I still do that. And I still put myself, because of that experience, I tell myself, hey, I can do this. If I did that, I know I can do this, and whatever this is. So that's the second thing. The third thing was that I learned was to just be my authentic self in terms of my food and find myself. Because I remember in the beginning, it was before Restaurant Wars, where I would look to the right and I would see somebody doing something cool. I would look to the left and I would see somebody doing something cool. I'm like, oh my gosh, I could do that. Versus, why am I here? And what do I have to bring to the table? I mean, no pun intended, but kind of pun intended. And so all of those things and just sort of standing in my own truth. So those are the three things that I learned late.
I'm going to repeat them to make sure I've summarized correctly.
You
You
know-
rediscovered soul food. Be comfortable with the uncomfortable
Mm-hmm.
and be your authentic self.
Yes.
That's really good advice. And I think in any career path that you're on, that's excellent. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you, Carla. Now, the more mature Carla, and this is about soul food and the dishes again. Can you share with us some of the dishes that reflect your African roots? And you might want to share with the audience who may not be aware of what you've learned about your biological connection to the African continent.
Okay. So I want to give a shout out to African ancestry, because years ago I had my DNA test and I found out that I am Yoruba from the Yoruba people from Nigeria and the Bubi people from Bioko Island, which is off the coast of Equatorial Guinea. And then on my dad's side, there is I forget the tribe, but from Ghana. And when I learned this, I was so emotional. And in that moment, I remember it was Michael Twitty who actually revealed my DNA to me with the president, Gina Page. And I think it was such an emotional moment, because until you aren't really thinking about that you don't know. And all of a sudden in that moment, when somebody tells you, you feel like you were adopted and you're finding a little more about yourself, which was incredible. And it was amazing. One of the dishes that I do, and I did it on Top Chef All Stars, was the groundnut stew. And it's that dish. And then I do a callaloo. My brother-in-law is from Liberia, and so those are two dishes that I do. Even though callaloo depends on where you're from, and if you're from Jamaica or the islands, and and where that dish is inspired from. But I want to say the African groundnut stew, and when I did it on Top Chef All Stars, I remember doing that dish during a challenge that was the U.S. Open Challenge. And it was a team challenge. And when I announced what I was going to do, they were like, really? You're going to do a stew, like a groundnut stew? I'd be like, what the heck? Like, we're trying to win this thing. And that was in, I think, 2011. And it's interesting because it's now 12 years since, and you see the Black chefs who are expressing themselves in a certain way on Top Chef and other competition shows, showing the depth and the range of food from the diaspora. But at the time, it was like, wait, you're putting tomatoes and ginger and peanut butter together? Like, what? But then for that dish, I actually ended up winning that challenge. And it was so affirming to me, because good food is good food. And when you put the love and heart and yourself, your authentic self behind a thing, and you say no to the naysayers because it's not their thing. So if you allow yourself to say no to someone who is expecting to express themselves, then you have erased your authentic self in that moment. And so for me, it was such a affirming moment, and I continue to look back on that moment as I did my soul food cookbook, as I cooked in various kitchens and catered and did events and worked with brands. It was that moment that was very much defining for me, because it was full of my African heritage.
Well, that's wonderful. Then and groundnut stew, absolutely delicious.
And you know what I did, Charlotte, and for that groundnut stew, not only was it was really good, but I made it vegetarian. I made it vegetarian, and I added hot water cornbread with like a lime salt on it. So I brought a little bit of my southern stuff. So instead of eating it, which you might maybe with fufu, or if you're in Ghana, kenke, so they would take, the cassava and they would use the soup. They would use that ball and eat the soup. So in the South, I feel that hot water cornbread is a version of those raw or the soft breads like kenke or fufu that you would eat with your soup. And that's how it transforms in the Black diaspora and then in the African diaspora into the South. So so I eat it with hot water cornbread.
Oh, I had never made that connection.
Yeah, I mean, you think about it, right?
Cornbread is certainly, it's a treat. And I think it's something that people made over in this country when maybe things in the pantry were a little scarce and everybody can't make it. My grandmother made really good hot water cornbread. Yeah. And she was from Alabama. So
you can see Alabama, Tennessee, Mississippi, I think all of those sort of southeastern states, our foods are very similar. But when you think about us using corn versus cassava, that's the influence of the Native American. So that corn was available, cassava maybe not so much. And it's really interesting how our food is influenced by other cultures.
And now people call it, fusion. Now it's fusion. Back in the day, it wasn't fusion, but now it's
no, it wasn't fusion. It was people. It was almost like things that grow together, go together. But people who are around each other, the influences are very natural. I mean, think about it. When we see something like, I don't know, I'm going to use hot chicken, Nashville hot chicken. Nashville hot chicken, came from the Prince's family in Nashville. But if you go some other place and you make pizza, you may see hot chicken on pizza. You may see hot chicken and pasta. You may see hot chicken, in different ways. The influence came from an idea from one family who was in Nashville, and it has spread throughout the world. So it is very natural that what we're calling fusion, but the influence of other cultures.
Yeah. And I think oftentimes when we see a hot chicken today, so many people don't know where it originated, the true story of hot chicken.
Yeah.
And
correct.
This is wonderful. This is new. This is hot chicken. And you're thinking, that's really not. It's not new.
It's not new. And I think the thing that I love, and if ever my show comes out and we talk about the hot chicken and we talk about all of these other cultural influences of a dish, if you don't know the culture behind a dish, you really don't know the dish. And I think so often we are drawn to the dish and the taste, but you can't really separate the people from the dish. Even soul food. Soul food comes from a lot of different people. It comes from, if you're in Virginia, it's going to come from the elite. It's going to come from Native Americans. It's going to come from Africans. So it is a blend of cultures. And as soon as someone starts to cook it, they're going to naturally bring their own self to the food. Like, let me try some of this. I have this in my pantry. Maybe it's very different from the pantry of, European Americans, a Native American. and we have a little more spice, based on the culture from the African diaspora, whatever countries. So we're all taking little bits, but at the end of the day, soul food, and I just want to say it should be capitalized. It is a proper noun, capital S, capital F, because it is a particular cuisine of a particular group of people, and it has its own characteristics.
Very true. And hopefully, after our chat this evening, one-on-one with Carla Hall, we will be able to set some of the naysayers and people with limited knowledge of the food, set people straight. Because certainly one of the things that we often hear is that, well, soul food isn't good for you. And it's not that the food isn't good for you. It's more of what are people doing who prepared the food? Did they add 3/4 of a pound of butter? Or did they add the whole bag of marshmallows? So we have to take ownership of what we do to make the food not as good for us as it is in its unvarnished state.
Well, I mean, let's talk about that, because I think that when you think about macaroni and cheese, fried chicken, smothered pork chops, candied yams, when you think about all of those dishes, I think it's absolutely the box that we put soul food in. But I also think that those are celebration dishes. I think those are the dishes that I've had, maybe, I don't know, 1 or 2 times a month. When I was growing up in the South, we didn't eat like that every day. And I think that soul food has a bad rep, because when you had those celebration dishes in the restaurants, and other people and other cultures were flocking to those restaurants, they were sold because you knew that they were crowd pleasers. But
Yeah.
that wasn't the only food that we had. I mean, my grandmother made lots of beans, lots of legumes, lots of grains. I think that when you think about, and when I did my cookbook, Carla Whole Soul Food, Every Day in Celebration, I make the distinction because I wanted to explore the idea, if my ancestors or my grandmother, 4 times, 5 times removed, came over today, what would she be eating? And it's millet and sorghum and fonio and all of these other grains, and yes, black eyed peas and yes, collard greens, but it doesn't necessarily have to be seasoned with pork. But why was it seasoned with pork? Because if you only have a little piece of meat and you're going to season it and make it taste great, but that doesn't mean as soon as you become more affluent and as soon as you have more resources, then you're going to get a lot more pork and put in there, right? So
Yeah.
there's a reason. And I think that if we explore all of the vegetables, like people have gardens, if we explore how they were eating from their gardens and growing their food, I think those are the everyday soul food dishes. But I think we put soul food in a really small box. And I think that box is starting to get larger as Black chefs are exploring what to take from the past and how to move it forward, because it doesn't have to stay the same. All other foods are growing and changing,
Yes.
and sort of having their stamp on them without being in such a small box.
I think certainly the box is getting much larger. And as we're seeing many of the Black chefs becoming household names, the things that they're doing with traditional foods, that it really is raising the bar and also giving entrepreneurs an opportunity to look at their creativity and say, well, what else can we do with this? And I'm thinking in terms of what the family from the Chicago area has done with IO Foods, which is a frozen convenience food that is adapted from West African dishes. And, 10 years ago, you wouldn't find West African in the convenience section of your grocery freezer.
Right. Right. I've been saying for the last 8 years or so that African food is going to be the next hot thing. And why that is so exciting and interesting to me is it's almost like Mexican food. Anything that's in a taco, I don't care what you do with that taco, what you do with that filling, it still goes back to Mexicans, right? You can't,
Yeah.
you can't, you can't take it and say it's yours. You can't, I mean, you could, I don't care what you're going to put in that tortilla. You may have a salsa, but at the end of the day, you know that the influence came from a particular country, right? And I think
Yeah.
that's how I feel about African food. When you are looking at some of these dishes and kenke and like callaloo and all of that, they have come from a particular place. And we're now in a place where we're honoring these chefs and we're honoring the culture. And I think even with people trying to see what their DNA is, it's like, what does your DNA look like on a plate? I think people are really looking through the cultures to see where there's a connection. And so by doing that, you see all of these other African chefs, and there was a huge presence of African chefs at the World Expo. Alexander Smalls had a Kivalon, which was an African food hall with all of these chefs throughout the continent of Africa. I know I feel like we treat Africa like it's a country, but the continent of Africa, all of these different countries are represented at a Kivalon, and it was really exciting to see and what they're doing and how they're moving their food forward.
Well, that just leads into my next question, Carla. You've stirred a few pots throughout your career, and one of them is that you worked as a fashion model at one time. And it's always alluded to that there's a synergy between food and fashion. And what would you say soul food and fashion have in common?
When I think of fashion, I think of color, pattern, texture, shine. I mean, after working with Clinton Kelly for 7 years, color, pattern, texture, shine. When I
Mhm.
think of soul food, I think that it is texture and flavors and like the depth of flavor. And the shine for me is going to be pickles to brighten all of those heavy dishes.
Mhm.
And it's also like a quilt, as because in a family, you have all of these different people who, like in your family, who make like a great pound cake, a great potato salad, great deviled eggs, let's say, great, I don't know, candied yams. And so when you bring those people together, the fabric of your family, it feels like an outfit. And everybody seamlessly comes together to put those dishes on the table. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Yes.
As yeah, thank you. I'm going to think about that when we're grilling out for the next holiday.
I mean, before we started talking, you and your cousin were talking about Michelle. Did I make that up, or it was
No, that's
Michelle?
correct. Uh-huh. Yeah.
You all were talking about how your dad or someone did the
Her
best
dad.
lamb. Her
Mhm.
dad made these really great lamb ribs, right? What it takes, and when people are trying to recreate a dish, or they're like, shoot, I wish I had that recipe. What it takes is all the cousins to get together, get their taste buds together. And instead of intellectually thinking about this recipe that would be written down, what do you remember about it? Like, what flavors do you remember about it? And I think that's probably the most powerful connection to your family. I remember when I was on the Paula Deen show, and everybody in my family was trying to make my grandmother's iced tea. I know it seems so simple, but we couldn't recreate her iced tea. And Paula Deen had done this, what she called an iced tea lemonade. She took some iced tea, she did canned lemonade, and she mixed the two. And right at the end, she put in some almond extract. And here I am on her show. And this was years ago. This is probably right after the first time I was on Top Chef. And I tasted that lemonade and I was like, oh my God. What? Oh, I was just like, I just looked at the glass and I said, oh my gosh, this is my grandmother's iced tea. And it was the almond extract. And I started to just cry. And it was just such a visceral memory for me. And sometimes it is just having something, but when you have something and you want to, you're like, I know this flavor. It's like, what is in it? So you can take that flavor and take it back to those lamb ribs. And it's like a puzzle. And you just piece it together because that is how you're going to recreate that recipe or that dish that you don't have something that is written down. But the memory lives in your body and it lives in your olfactory senses to recreate that puzzle. And you may need some help. I mean, you may have one flavor, somebody else may have another flavor, but together, and somebody has to, start putting those pieces together to make it. And I feel like you're going to recreate it.
Okay, we're going to work on that this summer. You kind of alluded to this, and I'm going to ask you to delve a little deeper. What do you see in the future of soul foods, traditional foods, foods from the diaspora? What do you see in terms of what will we be talking about and eating maybe in the next 5 years or next year?
Yeah. First, I want to say, I want to see two different things. So I want to see the traditional foods that I grew up on. I was born in 1964. I want to see those continue. I want to make sure that the younger generation appreciates it and continues to learn to cook it without shortcuts so that you can truly pass it along. Whenever we have Thanksgiving dinner, I task my nephews and my niece to make dishes out of my cookbook because those pretty much are the ones that we had, like the first cookbook I did, that some of those soul food dishes came from my grandmother. I think soul food is in this beautiful place here, like with Eric Williams, with Virtue and DeMar, his sous chef or chef de cuisine. I think that they're doing a really great job in showing soul food with a little bit of a twist, that it makes it more commonplace, that people are excited about soul food and they're introducing more ingredients from the diaspora. And I can say the same thing about Tiffany Dairy, Tanya Holler, Nina Compton, Kwame Nwachi, Gregory doing some of those dishes from Haiti. And I think incorporated, because let me back up. Soul food is fusion food, right? It's fusion. It is American, Native American, and African, right? It's fusion. But I would like to see the future of soul food incorporating some of the foods from the African diaspora, because that is taking apart the fusion and leaning into where these dishes came from and honoring our culture and knowing that culture and embracing it and seeing it bigger than just the United States. So you're looking at the Caribbean and you're looking at Africa as well. That's what I'd like to see.
Is that the theme of your future book?
No, but it should be. I will have a restaurant in 3 years. And when I think about what I want that food to be and how I want to present it, and I want to present it in a way that I'm educating people about who I am. Like, what does my DNA look like on a plate? What are the places that we have not embraced and we've overlooked? Because I still think that when I tell people that I'm going to have a restaurant and they will say, so is it going to be more than soul food? Is it going to be, because they see it as a very small thing. They don't see it as the big red box that I see it in. So I think that the future of soul food is going to be a lot bigger than the box that some people, whether you are in the community or outside it, it's going to be bigger than that box that you're putting it in now.
Okay, well, we will be watching for news of that restaurant. Speaking of some of the things that you're doing, can you share with the audience your Sweet Heritage line and how that came to be?
I am. Thank you for asking about that. I am so excited. The Sweet Heritage line is on QVC. It launched in March, at the end of March. It is something that I've been working on for about 4 years. I've always seen myself with the cookbook having a line of products that reflect who I am and the influences in my life, who are my grandmothers. And it is a modern version of sort of what was very traditional in their kitchens. I am using the motif of the okra flower. And, and you see flowers, you see people using floral motifs in their kitchenware, but I wanted the flower that I use to mean something. And the colors are very bright. I want to remind people to cook with love and live with joy. And these colors are bright. I have a tomato, and a cornflower blue, and a sage, and a plum. And this fall, those colors are going to be I'm doing more of a purple color. I'm bringing in mushroom for those of you who think the bright colors are a little too bright. So I have some neutrals for you, but I'm having such a good time using not only my time in the kitchen cooking, and for a very short time in restaurants, but I also love to teach cooking classes. And so I am taking that information, and the students, the people that I know who don't necessarily cook, I am using my experience in the kitchen to make these hard goods like pans and my sheet pans and this is the menopausal moment, my cake pans, like wide with the handles, right? Oh, you know what? I'm going to tell you all. So every chance I get, I know we're talking about soul food, but every chance I get, I talk about menopause because I have to pause sometimes because I can't remember what I am saying. So that's what's happening today, and I'm very open about it.
Well,
It's not going away.
Thank you. That's what we need. We have to be transparent.
Yes.
Well, that's very exciting. Now, to shop for the line, we need to go to qvc.com.
Yes, QVC.com, and just search Carla Hall, and all of the products are going to pop up. And then I have also some food items that are on there. I have a baked Nashville hot chicken. It is more expensive than I think what people are thinking that they would pay for a chicken. It is an organic chicken. It is whole. It is hand butchered, like with spices and crowd back. And you can put salt on it, salt and pepper. It goes into the oven and it bakes. And then I give you a recipe for a hot honey sauce to put on it. And it's delicious. And I have some cakes. I have some Brunswick stew. I have pulled pork and pulled chicken, like barbecue pulled pork and pulled chicken. And those products are growing all the time.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And so you have an alternate for folks who just are not going to get in that kitchen themselves.
Yes. Yes, I do. But you still have to do a little bit.
Now, for that age-old question, Carla, is it soul food or Southern food? Some folks use the term interchangeably.
I'm going to read you something from my cookbook because you may be wondering, what's the difference between Southern food and soul food? Easy answer, Black cooks. And I'm one of them. A lot of the dishes, seasonings, and techniques are the same, but there's an extra oomph in soul food. It's like the difference between a hymn and a Negro spiritual. So that's how I'm going to break that down.
I hope that answered the question. I got it. I know the assignment. We have more questions for Carla, but we've run out of time. So we're going to post the remaining questions and answers on our Facebook page, Chow Chow and Soul. But before we go, we want people to know what's going on and how to stay in touch.
Okay, you all, Instagram, Carla P. Hall. That's Carla. That's P for Patrice, Carla P. Hall. My website, carlahall.com. I'm on Facebook, Chef Carla Hall. I'm on Twitter, but I gave up that blue check because I wasn't paying for it. So those are all the.
I really, I can understand that, and that's one of the things that is so endearing about you, Carla, is you are candid and transparent, and you tell it like it is.
But inside, Charlotte and everybody, I am going to share my inner Carla. I mean, my inner auntie. I feel like I am an auntie. Inside, sometimes I feel like I'm 80 years old because 80-year-olds can say whatever they're thinking. And I always say also, I'm direct with love. I don't want to tear you down. But if you ask me, I'm going to tell you. So just know that you see me in the street, you ask me, I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you exactly what I think. But it's all in love. It's really not to tear you down. It's because you asked and I figure you can handle it.
And it's constructive.
It's constructive. Exactly right.
I want to thank you, Carla, so very much for chatting with us one-on-one and sharing so many pearls of wisdom. That whole statement about be your authentic self, I think so often people think they need to reinvent themselves and to be someone that probably their mother wouldn't recognize. So I really appreciate your sharing that. Be your authentic self. I want to thank all of you all who joined us. I hope you learned something you're going to take into the kitchen and you can say, oh, I learned this from Carla Hall. Thank you for joining us for this inaugural broadcast of Folks, Food, and Soul. Our next episode drops next week when we sit down with food photographers Brittany Connerly and Clay Williams. You know those beautiful food images you see in cookbooks and magazines? Well, these are some of the people who create those images, and they will be on hand to chat with us about their craft and their journey in becoming sought-after food photographers. So until next time, eat well.